The sun beat down on a scorched and broken wagon trail, its light bleached white across the carcass of a shattered world. Wood splinters lay half-buried in dust, blood staining the wagon's remnants. A wheel rolled lazily in the wind, one spoke cracked, like the limb of a snapped wishbone. Silence ruled, save for the creak of leather straps fluttering loose and the lonely groan of wind through cottonwood trees, and that emptiness. A child moved. She was barefoot. Her dress torn, blackened at the hem, crusted with dry blood and prairie soot. She limped, one arm held protectively to her ribs, the other trailing behind like a forgotten wing. Her eyes were too still, too wide. And she did not cry. Not anymore. 12-year-old Eleanor Foster, Nell, her father used to call her, had not spoken since the ambush 2 days ago. Not when her mother was cut down. Not when her baby brother went silent in her arms. Not when the screams ended and only buzzards remained. Somewhere east of the trail, a lean shadow watched. He sat astride a painted horse, a bough slung across his back, long hair braided with bone beads that clinked softly in the wind. Nakoa of the Noyonu Comanche had tracked the smoke for hours, following it like a trail of ash laid out by ghosts. He had not expected to find anyone left breathing. But there she was, fragile, dust-smeared, walking like one of the dead. Nakoa dismounted, moved silently through the brush, observed. The girl staggered, then fell to her knees. The impact kicked up dust, and for a moment she stayed there, her small shoulders rising and falling, each breath a war of its own. He stepped forward. She heard him. She turned her head. Her eyes locked with his dark, endless pools that held no fear. Only numbness. Exhaustion. As if she'd already buried everything she loved, he stopped 5 feet away, hands visible, palms open. "I won't hurt you," he said gently in Comanche. She didn't move. He tried again, in broken English this time. "You hurt." Nothing. That he looked at her knees, raw and bleeding. Her ankles swollen. Her arms burned from sun and roped. He took a step closer. Still no reaction. Another. He knelt, slow as dusk. Reached into his leather pouch, pulled out a canteen. Uncorked it, held it forward. She watched it, eyes following the water slosh. Then, with a trembling instinct of survival, she crawled toward it. The first sound she made in 2 days was a gulp. Nakoa said nothing, let her drink, watched her hand shake. Then, wordlessly, he took off his outer cloak and wrapped it around her. She didn't resist. When he gently scooped her up, her body tensed for only a moment, then slackened. Her head rested on his shoulder like she'd been waiting for that permission all along. He walked back to his horse, and the wind blew across the trail, sweeping away dust and death, leaving only the shape of 2 footprints and the beginning of something neither of them yet understood. The ride back was slow. Nakoa placed the girl gently in front of him, her thin frame barely filling the crook of his arm. She didn't ask where they were going. She didn't speak at all. Her hands gripped the saddle horn, knuckles pale, yet her posture was upright, like someone used to holding on through storms. The sun was high by the time they reached the edge of his hunting shelter, a narrow structure covered in buffalo hide, hidden within the folds of a cedar grove. Smoke no longer rose from it. No one waited. Nakoa had been alone a long time. He dismounted, then helped her down. She winced when her bare feet touched the earth, so he lifted her again without asking, carrying her like something sacred. She did not resist. He set her down inside the shelter and lit a small fire from coals banked the night before. She sat against a pile of rolled hides, eyes following every motion like she was watching the rules of a new world unfold. From his pack, he pulled cornmeal and dried berries, boiled them into a thick porridge. She ate in slow, methodical mouthfuls, never asking, never thanking, just surviving. Nakoa studied her as one might a wild animal who had somehow wandered into the firelight without fleeing. She was thin, but not malnourished, bruised, but no broken bones. But the silence clung to her like old smoke, settled deep in her lungs, stealing voice and sleep alike. That night, the girl lay under his buffalo robe, facing the fire. Nakoa sat nearby, sharpening his knife, each motion smooth and slow. Outside, the wind whispered in cedar tongues, but she never stirred. At one point, he paused and asked quietly, "What's your name?" No answer. "You have a name." Somewhere inside. Still nothing. He didn't press. He'd known silence too well himself. Years ago, after his brother was taken during a raid, he'd gone 2 months without speaking, until grief took shape in the sound of his own breath one cold morning. Maybe she, too, needed that long. In the morning, she was awake before him. She had stacked the cooking stones, gathered firewood, tried to sweep the shelter floor with a branch. He watched her in silence, struck by the quiet diligence of someone who needed to belong, not for praise, but to keep the ache at bay. When she turned and saw him watching, her lips parted as if to speak. But nothing came. Just breath. And that was enough for now. By noon, Nakoa led her to the creek, slow-moving and clear. She stood at the bank, uncertain. He pointed to the water, then mimed washing. She frowned, then slowly stepped in, flinching at the cold. Nakoa turned to give her privacy. He knelt, checking animal tracks, listening to the forest breathe. Behind him, water splashed, softly, hesitantly. He turned back to find her scrubbing the blood from her dress, wringing it out with shaking hands. The stains didn't come out fully. But she scrubbed anyway. He brought her a blanket. She dried off behind a cedar. When she returned, clean and pink-cheeked from cold, she sat beside him, finally looking him in the eyes. He said, "I'm Nakoa." She blinked, swallowed, then mouthed, barely above air, "Nell." His breath caught. A name had returned. They walked back to the shelter in silence, not of fear, but understanding. And as the day faded and the wind shifted east, Nakoa built a second fire. This time, she reached forward and helped him light it. The morning sun filtered through cedar boughs as Nell awoke to birdsong, songs she had never heard before, yet half recognized as hope. She blinked and found Nakoa already up, gathering small branches to stoke the dying embers by the shelter's entrance. His movements were silent, respectful of dawn. She didn't speak, but she watched him, each measured gesture rooted in purpose, each glance holding kindness. He glanced at her and offered a nod, then beckoned her with his hand. Nell rose and followed him into the grove. The air smelled of pine and freshly fallen dew, a purity her world had forgotten. He paused beside a fallen log, placed a hand on it and pointed to the rough grain fire blackened. Then he walked 30 paces, gestured at fresh sap oozing from cedar bark. "Water," he said. She crouched and touched it. Cool, sticky, living. He showed her how to break a slender sap-covered stick, scrape the bark layers and chew them, letting her taste the sweet, resinous juice. She swallowed, eyes wide, the taste of tree and deep-rooted land. That afternoon, he taught her how to track, not men, but deer paw curls and rabbit runs. He knelt with his knife point in the dirt, sketching the tracks between them, naming each swirl in Comanche. Piquet, deer; Tuha, rabbit; Tsi, coyote. At first she shook her head silent, overwhelmed, but each word he repeated. She mimicked them after long pauses. Piquet. Tuha. Her tongue stumbled. She tried again. More careful. Each repetition settled on her tongue like a delicate prayer. Then she heard him breathe and smile. They knelt in shared quiet as a deer stepped from cover, ears raised, doe eyes blinking. Nell's heart nearly halted. But Nakoa laid a gentle hand on her arm, reminding her to breathe. They watched the deer nibble tender shoots. Nell felt hollow and full at once, drawn into something that had always existed and never before been her place. When evening came, they returned to the shelter. Nell washed cornmeal off her hands in the creek. Nakoa caught fish for supper. He showed her how once the line had bit, to loosen tension, not yank, teaching her to respect living things even as they were harvested. Cut the fish clean, gutted it, laid coals across the embers. Nell helped, her fingers trembling the first time she held the blade. But he guided her with quiet direction. Over fire, the fish cooked, its aroma filling the grove. They ate in silence. Nell tasted salt and smoky warmth. It anchored her. After dusk, Nakoa strung leather lines from the shelter's periphery and draped dried herbs, sage, sweetgrass, cedar, tied in bundles to air. Nell asked what each was for, though she spoke only slowly now, every word precious. She nodded as he explained. Protection, memory, healing. When she ran a finger across the stalks, he pressed his hand gently to hers, wordless permission to weave herself into ritual. Her tears caught in moonlight. That night, Nell slept sprawled on her buffalo robe, breathing deeper than she had in years. She awoke to Nakoa humming, a Comanche lullaby he sang softly while flipping embers in the fire. She smiled, remembering the word for ember, qual. Sparks from the fire drifted past her face, like tiny living stars. He paused and met her gaze. No words needed. He handed her a thin cedar flute. Nell cradled it, lifted it to her lips, and played a single note, aching, trembling. It cracked. She tried again. Stronger. The note soared. Nakoa nodded, smile quiet. Her first song in a new world. The next morning, Nell awoke to distant drumming, soft, insistent. Smoke spiraled above a nearby campfire, and as she stepped outside, she saw Comanche children playing tag through the cedar grove, their laughter ringing bright and lilting. Nakoa guided her into the circle. One of the older girls handed Nell a stick, drumming a slow, welcoming rhythm. Nell faltered, not knowing the dance, but the children paused. Then, almost on cue, they opened a space for her. She began to tap the rhythm, clumsily at first, but with growing confidence. Nakoa grinned, eyes warm. By the end, Nell's cheeks were flushed, not from retreat or fear, but from belonging. Later, they shared a quiet breakfast, dried peaches and soft bread. Nell chewed thoughtfully. "Pecan," she offered one of the children, pointing at the nut. The girl shook her head with a laugh. Nakoa whispered the word to chew, and the child's eyes lit up. Nell repeated the word, wrong at first, but the child's smile was reward enough. Yet as midday heat rippled through the camp, Nell felt a hollowness awaken inside her, a whisper she hadn't expected. She found herself gazing across the open fields, her thoughts drifting toward the prairie where her family's homestead had once stood, toward the creak of the porch swing, her mother's evening calls to dinner. She swallowed hard and looked down at her hands, now brown with dust and cedar. Nakoa watched as she slipped away. He followed her out of the grove, deep into the open plains. There, amid waving grasses, the expanse swallowed them. Nell stood facing the horizon, voice low. "I miss them." He just nodded, wrapping a hopeful meaning in his silence. That night, Nell sat outside the shelter, carving her name into a flat cedar branch, Nell etched once, then again by the next dawn, and a Comanche name beside it, Pa, Little Moon. When Nakoa found her the next morning, he touched the carved names gently. Then, leaning close, spoke softly. "Pa." She met his gaze, and spoke, "I am Pa." Dawn arrived in silence, soft as a breath over prairie grass. Nell woke wrapped in Nakoa's buffalo robe, still damp from mist, but safe. She lay still long enough to hear the world around her, twig scars against shelter canvas, bird calls, the steady rhythm of Nakoa's pulse as he slept beside her vigil. When she rose, he was gone. In the shelter's dim light, she found simple tools, a carved stone bowl filled with red ochre, brushes woven from bird feathers, and a strip of stretched deer hide on the shelter wall. Someone had drawn a faded circle and a single star at its center, message. She paused, fingers hovering. Then dipped a feathered brush into ochre and traced a line along the hide. The red dust spread, leaving a mark. Then another simpler. A sun, she decided, the same one that hours later would warm both plains and people. She worked quietly, filling space until her hand trembled and her cheeks burned. She stepped back, an imperfect sun, rising atop cedar silhouettes. But it gleamed with something beyond technique, a spark beyond loss. She didn't hear Nakoa approach until his shadow fell across the wall. He studied the art, lips parting in surprise. She tried to speak, but the words froze. Then she bowed her head. He didn't judge, only reached beside her and drew a line, a child's handprint, smaller, next to the sun. He looked at her, eyes soft, then placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, no words. Just understanding. Later that day, she joined the community women weaving baskets by the creek. Hands dipped into dyed grass and twined reed, pulsing in practiced rhythm. Nell sat with them, replicating their motion, first clumsy, strings slipping through her fingers. But each attempt grew steadier. Each pattern she copied became more than mimicry, it became comfort. A mother nodded at her as they held baskets across their laps. Good. Her word was soft, but universal. Nell smiled, her first spoken word in Comanche. She bowed again. That night, voices drifted to her, the elders recounting stories of Nakoa's bravery. Nell sat apart but close enough to catch his name. In the ember glow of the communal fire, Nakoa lifted his head when he saw her watching. The circle stilled, but space was made for her presence. Not as guest, but as witness. Nell looked at him, felt pride swelling where grief once lodged. Back in the shelter, Nell placed her sun and star art on a driftwood shelf. It felt like a story told, not spoken, but given. She sat beside it, hands folded, feeling something reshape inside. Nakoa entered without a sound, knelt beside her, and took her hand. He tilted his head, looking at the painting, not asking. Then he pressed 2 feathers into her palm, blue and white. She understood. She placed them into the sun design, pressing them gently into the ochre. They lay there like promise. He rose and gave her a small nod, the first time she felt truly seen. Dawn broke in pale pink, illuminating the cedar shelter where Nell and Nakoa prepared for a ceremony. Nell carried her painted deer hide, sun and stars glimmering, blue and white feathers pressed gently into the ochre. Nakoa brought sweetgrass, cedar bark, and a bundle of sage. Together, they stepped toward a clearing. Comanche elders and warriors gathered, forming a soft-shoed circle around the clearing. Warmth rose in the morning air. Expectation, respect, cautious hope. Nakoa led Nell to the center. He gestured for the elders to bring the ceremonial items: a shallow bowl of red ochre powder, a handcrafted pottery vessel of water, and bundles of smoldering herbs. Nell's breath caught. She understood what came next: an act of belonging. Nakoa knelt and opened the pot of water, pouring it slowly over Nell's fingers, palms, wrists. She flinched at the cold but let her hands rest submissively in his. One elder stepped forward and dipped her finger in the ochre powder, tracing lines across Nell's bare cheeks. A second elder followed, brushing sage smoke across her face, hair, chest, washing away former pain, inviting new life. Nell closed her eyes. The ache in her chest both tightened and eased. Anger, grief, fear coiled and released in the ritual. When the ceremony ended, she lifted her face to the sky. Her tears fell softly, shining like small embers. Nakoa lifted a cloth bag and held it before her. He removed a delicate necklace, beads of bone and turquoise, and placed it around her neck. It settled on her chest as a heartbeat. She reached up and touched it, then looked at him, eyes bright with tears and truth. A warrior stepped forward, offering her both hands. Nell took them firm and warm. The circle closed around her, no applause, just acceptance. Later, Nell stood a little taller. The shelter seemed smaller. She carried water containers to the communal well, her footsteps light but determined. She spoke to elders, laughed quietly with children. Her voice grew louder, her laughter warmer, like sun slipping across frozen earth. That night, Nakoa and Nell stood outside the shelter as elk calls echoed in the valley. She spoke her first full sentence in Comanche. "Thank you, my family." He touched his chest, then offered his hand. She took it and laid it over his chest. "They are my family," she said. He nodded, tears loosening at the edges of his eyes. But as the firelight danced across their faces, tension flickered at the edge of the circle. Through the trees, distant hooves and voices echoed. They both sensed it. Nakoa stiffened, cavalry riders. Nell felt her breath snare, but stood firm. Their belonging was no longer safe. The sunrise that morning brought no warmth, only colorless light over rolling grasses. Nell woke to the scent of dust, not dew, and the distant jangle of spurs. Through the slit of the shelter, she saw cavalry horses moving along the ridge above the camp, man-made shapes among unspoiled land. Her heart clutched. Nakoa approached silently, eyes narrowing as he observed the line of riders. He placed a hand on her shoulder, guiding her back into the shelter's shade. "They are close," he murmured in Comanche. Nell's stomach wrenched. She nodded. They stepped outside together. A breeze tugged at her hair as she offered her hand to Nakoa. He clasped it firmly, a silent promise. Through the rising light, the cavalry's figures crystallized uniformed men on dark horses, rifles strapped and faces stern. They moved with purpose, lenses meant to find. Nakoa turned back to the camp. He gathered the women, children, and elders. His voice, always calm, became a quiet drum. Nell watched as he swept them toward the grove's deepest corner, out of sight. Her mind raced. What do we do? Inside the camp, Nell moved alongside cavalry scouts arriving in waves. Nakoa appeared at her side. He spoke to them softly, telling Nell afterward, "They seek the missing settler girl." She looked into his eyes, her former self, the home girl, past whispers, but this was another world now. He guided her to stand tall, shoulders straight, voice firm. She inhaled, stepped toward the scouts. "My name is Nell Foster," she said in English, crisp and clear. "You have found me." Heads snapped. The scouts' surprise rippled. One dismounted, disarmed by her presence. They paused, looking at her cedar bark necklace, the ochre marks, the calm in her eyes. Nakoa stayed behind, ever watchful. The cavalry scout, the one who dismounted, stood tall, hand on his holster but voice steady. "We found her. Tell us, Miss Eleanor." His tone was respectful, but edged with suspicion. Nell squared her shoulders. "Yes." She paused, meeting each rider's gaze. "I have asked our people to shelter me. They have done so." A stir passed through the cavalry ranks, uncertainty flickering in armored eyes. The scout nodded to his comrades, who conferred in hushed tones. Nell watched, heart pounding. She thought of her parents, of home. But she thought, too, of the drum-lined laughter of Comanche children and Nakoa's unwavering strength. To her side, she felt his presence, solid, protective. They stood together, not captor and captive, but joined in purpose. Finally, the scout said, "We need to return her to her family." "That is protocol." Nell's breath caught. "My family is here," she said softly. "These are my people." In the hush that followed, the meaning of her words settled like dawn over prairie ridges. A lieutenant stepped forward. "Miss Foster, if you wish to stay, you must stay with their approval. And ours. We'll consult with your guardian." Nakoa exchanged a glance with the scout, then met Nell's eyes. She nodded subtly, brace for change. The gathering at dawn felt like the shifting of tectonic plates. Word had spread. Nell Foster, the missing settler child now living with the Comanche, had declared herself one of them. Inside the cedar grove, Nakoa had organized a circle, with elders, warriors, and children standing resolute amid soft smoke wreaths. Nell stood beside him, no longer a passive guest, but a sentinel of two worlds. The cavalry scouts waited at the grove's edge, horses shifting under reins. Their blue-gray uniforms glinted in the pale light. A lieutenant and the scout captain stood in front. Their expressions were respectful, though determined. Silence stretched, an invisible rope between cultures. One of the elders stepped forward and spoke in Comanche, voice steady. Nell listened, comprehension rooting her feet. She saw him nod at Nakoa, then turn to her. She stepped forward, 2 steps beyond her mentor, bearing the weight of impossible choice. Raising her voice in English first, she said, "I am Nell Foster. I was born among settlers, yes. But for many moons, I have lived here. I have learned your ways, and my heart has learned them too. These are my people." The lieutenant cleared his throat. "Miss Foster, the cavalry is here to escort you home." Her shoulders straightened. "Home can be here too." A ripple passed across the soldiers, some shifting uneasily. The lieutenant exchanged a look with the scout captain. Then, turning to Nell, he said, "But your family, your parents, they believe you are dead." Tears sprang. She closed her eyes, hands clenching his. "I know, but I am not dead. I live with them." The lieutenant glanced at Nakoa. "Are you her guardian?" Nakoa nodded, wordless authority manifest. His stance said more than any oath. He was protector, brother, community. The lieutenant sighed. "Protocol demands we return her. But we will speak with your father directly." Nell interrupted. "He was killed the day I disappeared. My mother, too. Only I survived." Her voice cracked, but steady. "If you doubt, ask the settlers north of the ridge. They know." He paused, stared at her. A lifetime of possibilities flickered in his gaze. Then he nodded. "Very well. We will send word to your nearest kin. But until then, you may remain." A faint cheer rippled through the Comanche circle. Cavalry horses stamped and snorted beyond the grove perimeter. Nell's mother's voice echoed inside her mind. "Keep yourself alive, Eleanor." Her mother hadn't hoped for her to become a Comanche daughter, but she had hoped something would come of her survival. Now Nell lifted her gaze at Nakoa. He returned it with a quiet pride that she had never seen in settler eyes. He reached out, pressed the buffalo robe scarf around her shoulders, and said softly in Comanche, "You belong." The elders murmured approval. The lieutenant offered a small bow. "Miss Foster, will you ride with us to deliver the news?" She shook her head. She turned to Nakoa. "I will stay with them." A flutter passed through the cavalry ranks, some astonishment. The scout captain stepped forward. "You've made a brave choice. A rare one." Over the next days, Nell fell into a new rhythm. She sketched plans for rebuilding a fallen shelter, helped gather wood for winter stores, taught children to write their names in English scrapes on bark. And with Nakoa, each evening she walked the ridge and spoke of new things. The settler's seasons, the Comanche horse songs, the shapes of sky and memory. Her roles multiplied: teacher, translator, builder, healer. She taught basic wound cleaning with sage and water, merging settler medical habits and Comanche care. For the first time, she felt her past not as a broken fragment but as fuel. One afternoon, cavalry riders returned with news, a letter from a distant relative, a great-aunt, who was searching. She had navigated bureaucracies, sheriff posts, and telegram delays. The aunt had arrived at a nearby fort and was ready to come in person. Unless Nell said she would stay at the grove, tension sat on every blade of grass. Nell felt at war within her, a weight pressing on both shoulders. She walked to the edge, pausing near the entrance. Nakoa followed. The lieutenant and captain stood waiting. The letter was handed to Nell. She unfolded it, eyes racing across long lines of kin longing to find a piece of home. The letter ended, "You are loved. Always. If you come home, we will learn to know the person you've become." She folded it slowly. Nakoa touched her hand, unspoken question, "What do you choose?" Nell exhaled. Her voice broke but held truth. "I have become someone. I cannot unlearn that person." She looked at the cavalry. "Tell them I will not be going." Shock rippled. The lieutenant swallowed. He glanced at Nakoa, then nodded. "Understood." Space broke open. Children ran to her, elders embraced her. Nakoa held her tight at the center. Silent joy, thunderous as dawn. That night, a feast lit the grove in flickering light. Dried meats, maize, berries filled communal bowls. Nell sat next to Nakoa. He poured water in her bowl. She tasted it and smiled. He leaned close and whispered in Comanche, "You chose too." She placed her hand on his cheek. "But here, I chose one." He bowed his head, then raised it, eyes bright against firelight. In that moment, Nell became two worlds at once, a daughter of settler loss and a Comanche daughter reborn. Each step forward shaped not only her destiny, but redefined family, loyalty, and what it means to belong. The dawn sky shimmered pale like new parchment, and the cedar grove was already alive with fresh promise. Nell stepped onto the soil that had taken her in, the same soil that had once held only uncertainty and grief. Now it cradled resolve. She breathed in the scent of pine, earth, sweetgrass, and sage, an olfactory tapestry woven from both hardship and belonging. Beside her, Nakoa stood silent, offering the strength she would channel today. They arrived together at the communal clearing, where children circled in quiet anticipation. Nell carried a woven basket filled with smooth stones and soft leather strips, her supplies for teaching a first lesson in writing and healing tools. The children's laughter broke into a hush as she advanced, heart-pounding but steady. She lifted her voice in a greeting, "Yokon, children. Today we learn to heal together." Her tone was calm and warm. The children mirrored her breath, still curious. Nakoa spoke first, introducing her in Comanche. "Pa, little moon, has learned what it means to care. Now she will teach us." A ripple of quiet admiration followed his words. Nell caught his gaze, feeling the bond between them reinforced by shared trust. She knelt and laid out the leather straps and stones. "First," she continued softly, "we learn words for what heals." She pointed to a stone. "Stone," in English. Then, "Tunia," in Comanche. Little hands waved, "Tunia." She nodded. "Remedy." "Remedy," they repeated. Morning wore on in layered cycles. English word, Comanche translation, a whispered echo from both languages mingling. The children stumbled, laughed as their tongues twisted, yet each attempt was met with pride in Nell's dark eyes. Laughter turned to concentration, and concentration became confidence. Elders watched from the grove's edge. A hush remained in their gaze, not skepticism, but wonder. She had earned her place. By midday, Nell demonstrated how to wrap a simple poultice, a matter she had learned from settler mothers. She crushed bark and mixed it with water, applying it to her own forearm and explaining warmth, healing, purpose. She had prepared this moment, this merging of ancestral tradition and settler practice. When she applied the poultice to the skin, a calm chorus of approval rose. Nakoa placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "You do good work." She leaned into his warmth. After the lesson, Nell ventured deeper into the grove. The midday sun illuminated patches of grass where deer-fretted tracks faded. She knelt to touch them, lost in thought. Nakoa arrived beside her and knelt, tracing alongside her hand. They spent a long minute in companionable silence. Finally Nell spoke. "I think I've begun to understand what loyalty means." He nodded. "And what is that?" "That it can be planted and grown, even in a place you never meant to stay. My family thought I died, but now I live because they trusted me. And you trusted me back." He touched her hand. "Trust is earned. You earned ours." They stood. She felt lighter, more rooted than ever, but still she carried an ache, grief for a home she would never fully recall, and longing for a future tethered to two worlds. That evening, Nell and Nakoa returned to the open field by the ridge. The golden light of dusk draped across waving grasses. The children from the morning's lesson followed at a distance, whispering giggles. Nakoa said, "Tomorrow, we will plan to rebuild that shelter near the creek." "You mean the one that burned?" He nodded. "When the winter wind took it." She closed her eyes. "Yes." He took her hand. "You will lead that project. The village will help." She opened her eyes. I didn't expect that." He squeezed. "They believe you bring healing. They believe you belong." Tears sprang. She swallowed hard. "Thank you." He tipped his head, his expression soft. That night, Nell laid awake under the canvas roof of the shelter she had begun rebuilding, floorboard spread with fresh pine needles, stone hearth already taking shape. Her shoulder brushed the turquoise necklace Nakoa had given her. Amid the ache of fatigue, she felt a powerful hum inside, life rebuilt, purpose regained. She silently gave thanks, for death that delivered her, for silence that restored her, for a future that would hold both home and hearth. Morning light found her awake and aware, sweat on brow from reconstruction, calluses new on palm. Today she would lead the rebuilding. Nakoa and a handful of warriors arrived with spades, logs, nails, solid accents of communal purpose. Nell laid out stones and wood, instructing where each beam would go. "This wall faces west, towards the sun's last light. It will warm us in cold hours." The builders listened. They had learned from her before. She paused, scanning the site, then said, "Let's gather water after midday. We'll smooth stucco around the hearth after that." Men moved in silent rhythm. Nell felt gratitude for their gestures, not undirected labor, but coordinated intention. Midday sun climbed hot. Nell and women collected water in buckets. She spoke in Comanche and English, trading quips with other mothers. Their laughter was bright as a memory. By afternoon, the shelter had 4 walls and a roof in place. A small, new home crafted from lost at dusk. They placed a fresh buffalo hide on the ground. Nell knelt in front of the doorway as others stepped inside and sat. Nakoa sat behind her. He took her hand. An elder spoke in Comanche. "Little Moon's home is built." Heads nodded. Nell's heart swung wide. She spoke then, voice ringing, "Mita, this is my home." Soft applause blossomed. Nakoa pulled her into his arms. No ceremony needed. Their bond had braided, teacher, builder, heart. That night, Nell and Nakoa walked beneath a moon bright as promise. The prairie lay in silver hush. Nell said in English, "I can't imagine going back." He nodded. "You have built here." She squeezed his hand. "I want to do more than heal. I want to bring our worlds together." He stopped and faced her. "What do you need?" Her voice trembled. "I need them to trust me as much as I trust them." He touched her cheek. "Then let this night be the beginning of crossing, 2 worlds into one." She closed her eyes. Humility, hope, and resolve converged like light through water. They walked back to the shelter, 2 people rooted in 2 worlds, forging a new one together. Before dawn, Nell set out alone to the frontier edge. Across the prairie lay smoke. The cavalry had returned to their fort. She carried a letter in a soft cloth bag. This letter would ask them to come and bear witness to the goodness here. She didn't know if they'd accept, but she needed them to understand. Nakoa met her at the edge. "Are you sure?" She nodded. "Yes. It's part of the bridge I promised." He pressed her hand and said, "Then I will stand beside you." She smiled, tears glimmering. "Even if they do not stay?" "Even," he said. They stepped forward together, two silhouettes moving across golden grass toward an uncertain sunrise. The morning air was crisp with promise when Nell stepped from the shelter, a folded letter in her trembling hand. The prairie stretched infinitely before her, grass whispering in the breeze, as though urging her toward the truth she had buried deep and now held again. Nakoa stood beside her, silent sentinel, body angled protectively toward the north. The sun glanced off the sapphire bead on her necklace, flashing like a heartbeat. She unfolded the letter, its edges frayed from the journey, the handwriting unmistakably feminine, elegant. She recognized it before reading. "Dear Eleanor, I know this must surprise you." Tears pooled in her eyes before she read another line. "You might be frightened to learn I am still alive." Her chest tightened, breath snagging at all the possibilities. Reunion, rejection, belonging turned upside down. Nakoa watched, expression reverent, as she threaded through the words, each sentence unlocking memories she had protected herself from. The smell of bakeries, her mother's lilt, bedtime prayers by lantern light. She looked up. Her voice came, soft and unsteady. "It's from my aunt, Margaret Foster. She says she watched over the homestead when the others died, waiting for me. She says I'm loved." Nakoa gently folded the letter, brushed a finger across the inked name. "And?" His voice held a question lodged between hope and grief. She inhaled, then exhaled against bracing wind, eyes steady now. "She wants me to come home." The words trembled in the cold dawn. Her heart raced. Home, a place of memory and comfort, but also of grief and absence. Later that day, Nell convened an informal council at the shelter. Elders, warriors, mothers, and children gathered around the hearth, steam of tea pluming upward. Soft-footed, she stepped forward, letter in hand. "I received this," she announced, raising the parchment. "A letter from my aunt. She, too, survived. She's right there, only a few ridges beyond." She paused, scanning faces, faces that had become her family, her community. Gasps whispered. One elder laid a comforting hand on her shoulder. Another offered a smile tempered with sadness. Nakoa watched proudly. "I want to meet her," Nell continued, voice firm. "But I also want to stay." She laid the letter on a flat stone beside the hearth. "I am torn. Two worlds call to me, and I must answer both." Silence hung. Then voices murmured in Comanche, not argument, but understanding. They had built trust, yes, but they also respected origins. They took each other's hearts seriously. Finally, an elder spoke, "Bridges are built step by step. You must walk both with care." Nell bowed head. She met Nakoa's gaze, her anchor. Over the next hours, Nell prepared. She packed her pouch with combs, herbs, combed flax, and a small ceremonial stone that bore her sun and moon painting. Nakoa brought his horse, bridled and saddled for two. The afternoon sun warmed them as they set off east, across the ridge Nell had used to ride among warriors, now toward a land remembered mostly in memory and hope. Nell rode between Nakoa and the landscape she once called home. She swallowed the ache of lost time, uncertainty, and longing. They moved through cedar groves, then open plains. Animals blended shadows. Wind tangled hair. At her side, Nakoa's steady presence reminded her she would not go alone. They arrived at dusk at the old homestead, a weathered cabin, sagging roof, fields overtopped in tall grass. The moon hung low and full, illuminating broken boards and a lonely porch swing creaking with memory. A figure stood by the front doorway, an older woman, slender, silver-streaked hair tied back. Nell gasped, wrenching free from Nakoa's horse. "Aunt Margaret," she whispered, tears welling. Her aunt stepped forward and enveloped her in embrace. The scent of lavender and baked bread surrounded her, thawing winter's chill. Nell looked over Aunt Margaret's shoulder and realized she had never felt more lost or more found. Inside the cabin, cracks in walls cooled by absence. Nell traced her finger along old wallpaper peeling in corners. The hearth was cold, but the fire she lit that night was fierce and welcoming. They shared tea and quiet tears. Aunt Margaret spoke of life after the attack, the shock, the grief, planting gardens alone, never giving up hope. Nell listened, absorbing each word like rain to drought and sleep. Nell dreamed. She remembered the prairie, Comanche rhythms, Nakoa's whisper between cedar trunks. But also smelled baked bread, heard her mother's voice singing softly. When she awoke before sunrise, she was in the bedroom. Bathed in tender moonlight, Nell rose and walked outside. She had torn dreams and a heart stretched between two homelands. Tea breakfast, Aunt Margaret gently asked, "Do you want to stay?" Nell hesitated. Her heart pounded. She realized the weight of choice, loosely bound by roots, love, duty. Before she answered, Nakoa and a few Comanche chiefs rode into view. They dismounted and approached the cabin's front. Aunt Margaret walked out to meet them. Nell stood between both families, two cultures converging on a porch she once called home, now a threshold between yesterday and tomorrow and a clearing. Nakoa nodded respectfully to Aunt Margaret. She bowed in turn. Nell's heart thundered. Nakoa stepped toward her. He said quietly, "You belong to both." Her aunt said, "Your life with them proves your heart." Nell swallowed. She realized, finally, home isn't a place. It's who you love, and what you build across living ground. With tears, she gathered both hands. "Then I belong." Over the next weeks, Nell split her days between the cabin and the cedar shelter. She rebuilt the homestead garden with traditional seeds, a tapestry that merged settler crops and medicinal herbs she'd learned from Comanche healers. She planted rows of corn and beans and sage, weaving each seed into her new life. She taught her aunt cedar weave, then taught Comanche children English at the cabin. Nakoa worked beside her, showing them weaving techniques learned in both culture. Children ran between settlements. Elders shared stories about road-making across cultures. Each evening, they gathered on the porch, aunt and warrior side by side, star above them. On the day of the harvest festival, Nell and Nakoa led a procession from the cabin to the cedar clearing, baskets full of food, smoked meats, roasted maize. Settlers from the valley mixed with Comanche riders, children chatting in two tongues, elders watching with gentle smiles. Nell rode at the front, between her aunt and Nakoa, sunlight catching her hair and beaded necklace, riding clothes dusted both with prairie and plowed soil. She raised her voice to speak in both languages. "I am Nell Foster. I am Pa. I stand here, born of both. My heart is bigger for each of you." A hush rose, then blossomed into warm applause and tears of relief. Nakoa slipped beside her. He took her hand again as the community celebrated a new possibility. United hope, shared purpose. That night, Nell and Nakoa sat under the open sky, stars above, cornfields below, the hum of contentment all around. She rested her head against his shoulder and whispered, "Thank you for believing I could be both." He kissed her hair. "You carried us all." She smiled. And in the hush between two worlds, they built a bridge, not for escape, but for belonging. Dawn crept across the cedar clearing like a slow promise. Morning mist curled around the tall pines, and the scent of sweetgrass lingered heavy in the air. Nell stood in front of the council circle, her eyes steady and arms wrapped in a buffalo robe edged with turquoise, an emblem of her identity within the Comanche. Around her, elders, warriors, women, and children watched with respectful quiet. Nakoa stood to her right, silent as mountain stone. Today was the day of the oath. This was not a ritual of adoption like before, it was a declaration. Nell would be bound, by word and honor, to stand by her people in peace and conflict. The council spoke in low, deliberate Comanche. Nakoa translated portions into English for her, his voice unwavering. "Pa," he said aloud, "you have chosen to live among us. You have shown compassion, courage, bridge between worlds. Today you must prove your commitment before the elders and before the spirits of the land." Nell inhaled deeply, tasting both fear and purpose in the chill air. One elder stepped forward and placed a small leather pouch into Nell's hands. "This pouch holds our oath stones, each one an element of our people's bond. To wear them is to carry our trust. To carry them is to honor our ways," accepted and felt the small stones shifting inside, weight enough to lift her heart. Another elder, eyes bright beneath furrowed brow, spoke in English. "Miss Foster, this pledge is not taken lightly. It is binding. It is respected. It is for all times. Do you understand the sacrifice?" "I do," she whispered. The elder continued, "Speak your words in both Comanche and English, that all may know your promise." Nodding, Nell inhaled the cold air. She glanced at Nakoa, his fingers tight around his moccasin hems, eyes unwavering. She reached into the pouch, drew out a smooth obsidian stone, and Comanche, voice gaining strength. "And I patasai, little moon of the people, I pledge my life, my voice, and my hands to your healing and protection. I am your daughter, through blood of the land." She felt the council lean in. Then in English, "I am Nell Foster. I pledge my heart, my purpose, and my future to the Comanche people who saved me, and whom I now defend and cherish." The air seemed to hold its breath. Nakoa stepped forward and took her hand. His voice carried tenderness and strength. "This oath binds us, as family, as warriors, as protectors of life." He pressed his palm to her forehead in a silent blessing. She pressed hers in return. The elders nodded. A calm murmur spread through the crowd. Acceptance, pride, deepened trust. Following the oath, a feast was held under the open sky. Venison stew, roasted squash, dried berries, sweet sage bread. Nell sat beside Nakoa, their hands brushing when the crowd's attention drifted. Around them, strangers, and now family, laughed and whispered in English and Comanche. The feast drew settlers from Nell's aunt's household, curious and hopeful. Friendships formed, footfalls mingled, children ran between both communities, their laughter a new anthem. Nakao leaned close to Nell and said, "We are one now." She smiled, then stood to address the gathering. "It is an honor, more than I can say, to be called daughter, sister, friend. Thank you." Tears glimmered. Hands reached for hers. That afternoon, Nell rode with Nakoa and a handful of warriors toward the prairie edge where blood had been spilled months before. The air was tense. Rumors circulated of impending cattle raids by rival tribes. Fear flickered among the Comanche. Would they stand ground this time? Nakoa asked her to remain at camp, but Nell refused. She would ride with him. He hesitated, silent. Finally, he nodded. "If you will turn your bow and shield together, I will not leave you behind." She wrapped her cloak tight and followed. The ride was quiet, purposeful. Nakoa and warriors kept distance, but grateful for her presence. She held the pouch against her chest, feeling its pulse. They reached the edge of the prairie. A wind rose, sharp and expectant. Horses edged and pawed. Nakoa signaled them to stop. He turned to Nell and placed both hands on her shoulders. "Stay behind me." She nodded. "Tonight, we stand together." His eyes softened, awed by the girl who'd become warrior. A rustle in the grass. Shadows darted. From one rise, rival riders burst forward, shout rising. Cattle stampeded. Smoke flickered. Nakoa raised his bow, but Nell stepped forward. She pulled a scarf, tied in a sudden band. She knelt, placing a healing kit on soft grass, bombs from repaired sprains. A child Comanche had been her apprentice, no fear in his eyes. As sound escalated, Nakoa let arrow fly. Nell knelt beside the child, speaking softly, pressing balm onto torn knee, calming the young warrior's tears. Time became compressed, smoke, dust, shouting. Nell stayed, caring for the child, anchoring the chaos with mercy. Nakoa glanced her way, heart pounding. He realized two truths. This was no longer just protector and protected. This was family, forged of life and battlefield hope. He fought onward, but his gaze kept drifting back to her. When the rival riders fled, village warriors corralled cattle, and order returned. Nakoa returned. Nell rose, cloak torn, hands dirty. She met his eyes. He lifted her chin. "You stood with us," he said. Tears forced their way. "As one of us." He pulled her into fierce embrace. That night, under firelight, the Comanches celebrated their victory quietly. Nell and Nakoa sat side by side, hands entwined. He handed her a leather-bound strip, woven diary, pages of hide. Words in Comanche, scattered Emily's, notes, children's drawings. "It is yours," he said. to write our story. She traced the hide covers. She thought of her aunt and settlers. She thought of buffalo and cedar. She turned to Nakoa. The oath. It was not just to protect. It was to promise. I choose this life. This path. He smiled. You are Little Moon and Eleanor Foster, bound in honor. She leaned her head on his shoulder, and the silence that completed the night, they had become more than pair. They had become the promise of unity between two worlds, one heartfelt oath at a time. They set out at dawn, the horizon painted in pale gold and lavender. Nell rode at Nakoa's side, her bow slung across her shoulder, pouch of healing bombs at her hip. The prairie lay silent as old promises, waves of grass rippling with the wind. Behind them, the rest of the Comanche riders formed in ranks, warriors and scouts, some unsure, all resolute. Nell's heart thumped like a drum in her chest. Excitement, fear, purpose. Nakoa caught her hand. Stay close, he whispered. Trust the horse. Trust the land. Trust yourself. She nodded, breath steady. I do. They crossed into open terrain. Every crest revealed more, rolling hills, jagged stands of rocks, hollows where buffalo once roamed. The distant sound of cattle hoof thunder rumbled low, a reminder that this ride was more than patrol. Rival herds had strayed, and with the land's delicacy, so had tempers. By midday, they reached a wide valley where the enemy riders had been spotted, 20 strong, mounted, and with a renegade bent. Comanche riders slowed, eyes steel, bows resting on shoulders. Nell leaned forward, scanning. The enemy appeared, riders clothed in patched leather, hasty tags of red cloth, brandishing rifles. They rode across a tableland, spurs in, herds of cattle penned at their side. Smoke glimmered above, and the settlers, or renegades, were rounding cattle with weapon pointed north, toward Comanche lands. Nakoa raised a hand, then lowered it. The signal for soft charge. They'd not attack first, but they'd protect. Nell swallowed, bow in hand, adrenaline sharpening her eyes. They crested a rise together. A rival rider spotted them, gun raised, shouted. A rifle cracked. Dust erupted at Nakoa's horse's flank, rifle impact, sparks in dust. His mount bucked, but he kept balance. Nell's heart jammed against her ribs. She dismounted, kneeling by her horse. Nakoa rode toward him, taking arrow in hand, drawing it smooth. Nell joined him as he slipped the bolt across. She whispered, "Let's end this." He nodded. They both rose, bow taut. A volley of arrows flew across the valley. Nakoa's arrow found wood. Other Comanche arrows followed. The rival riders broke, gunfire rattling back. Nell loosed arrow after arrow, the release of power she had honed under Nakoa's quiet tutelage. One arrow clanged into a rifle barrel, shattering metal. A soldier dropped, his horse spooked, he reeled. Nakoa reached the rider, dismounted, and knocked weapon aside, then restrained him gently. Nell rode up, connecting across battlefield distance. Eye to eye, warrior to warrior. Comanche reined their mounts around the opposing herd and worked to guide the cattle away from Comanche lands. Nell stayed close to Nakoa, pointing rifle free, but armed with bomb jar and bandage. A young Comanche scout stumbled, leg bleeding from graze. Nell leapt from her horse, kneeled, and pressed the bandage into place. He winced, but steadying his breath, nodded deep thanks. Nakoa watched, pride igniting his chest. She was fully woven into the warrior fabric today, as skilled, as brave, as compassionate. When cattle were safely routed into ravine, Nakoa raised his voice in Comanche challenge. Go home. This land holds our children. Rival riders retreated, guns lowered, horses trailed dust back toward their own borders. Comanche riders cut and returned toward Nell and Nakoa. They were drenched in sweat, painted in dust. Nell's hair stuck to her face. Nakoa came to her side. His hand found hers, tight. Their people cheered, but not loud. Quiet respect echoed in the wind. One elder approached Nakoa, placing hand on his shoulder. You and her, both first today. Nakoa glanced back at Nell, who met his eyes. She nodded. He exhaled, 2 syllables. Yes. The valley took his whisper and carried it across stone and sky. They rode back to camp in golden dusk. Nell and Nakoa led, their silhouettes long against the low sun. When they crossed the prairie threshold, the community rushed forward. Children wove between horses, elders wept softly. Nell dismounted, stone-solid, as adrenaline faded, leaving trembling muscles and a soul forever changed. She knelt again to bandage a bruised calf, then exchanged words of pride with the chief healer. All eyes watching, love and astonishment mingled in flames and tears. Twilight's edge, Nell and Nakoa stood by the creek. He handed her a flask of warm peppermint tea. She felt its warmth seep into her chest. He spoke simply, "You were fearless." She shook her head. "I was home." He lifted her chin. "Then let's cross the next ridge, together." Night came with stars bright and cold. Around the communal fire, elders toasted those who stood for defense and compassion, warriors and healers. Nell sat beside Nakoa. He draped a blanket around her. She leaned into him, tears unresisting. He whispered, "You carry fire and water. You bring our world's balance." She pressed her face against his chest. "I carry more now, belonging." Before rest, Nell wrote in her leather journal, letters of names, victories, lessons, gifts of land and trust. She placed the arrowhead she broadhead forged today inside, whispering thanks to the spirit of home and the spirit of adoption. Nakoa knelt beside her as she closed the page. He smelled of leather and smoke. He pressed the pouch of oath stones into her hands. "You carry our trust." She brought it to her heart. "I carry it with honor." The wind whispered across water. The prairie night enveloped them, boundaries blurred between settler, warrior, girl, daughter. They had ridden across the plain, and now they rode into history together. Evening came wrapped in firelight and ancient song. A soft glow bathed the cedar clearing as the Comanche gathered for the sundown ceremony, celebrating Nell's true inclusion and her promise kept on the battlefield. Children climbed their parents' shoulders, elders leaned on staffs carved with buffalo horn handles, and warriors stood tall beyond feathered headdresses, their eyes focused and proud. Nell walked to the center of the circle, Nakoa at her side. She wore both cultures on her sleeves, a sash woven of settler flax and Comanche beadwork, and her face painted for ceremony, delicate ochre designs mingling English flowers and tribal swirls. Her heart beat steady, full of hope and history. The ceremony began with a low chant, elders thrumming drums that echoed like distant thunder rolling across the plains. Nakoa held Nell's hand and slightly inclined his head at each drumbeat. Nell met his gaze, her anchor in this sea of emotion. At the shrine under the cedar, the chief healer stepped forward. She held a wrapped bundle, Nell's symbol of unity. Her voice rose in Comanche. Nell understood every word. "Pa, tonight we honor you, not for who brought you here, but for who you have chosen to become. Daughter of blood and spirit. Protector of life and song. We accept you." The bundle was revealed. 2 joined arrow shafts bound with buffalo sinew, adorned with eagle feathers, 1 shaft from settler hunts, 1 from Comanche trackers, an emblem of bow and bridge. Nell reached forward, pressing both to her chest. Tears rolled as she whispered in Comanche, "Thank you." Nakoa knelt, touching both arrow shafts to the earth, honoring land, unity. Warriors repeated with him, drumbeats swelling in harmony. Afterward, Nell offered a speech. "In both worlds, I was a child of loss. Today, I am a daughter of both. My promise is to carry that unity, through action, healing, and heart." Settlers stood respectfully, some wiping tears. Comanche nodded, some voices lifted in match to hers. In that moment, she bridged centuries of mistrust. Their ceremony complete, the celebration erupted. Smoked meat passed, children danced, laughter and drums intertwined. Nell moved through the crowd, embracing both settler neighbors and tribal friends. She taught settlers to dance Comanche steps. She invited warriors to learn settler tunes. Each embrace, each step, stitched wounds wider than years. Nakoa watched her light threads being woven across cultures. His heart swelled, both proud and protective. Late into the night, under a sky empty of clouds, a messenger arrived, horse hooves soft over soundless soil. Nell and Nakoa stepped away from the fire's edge to meet him. He was a cavalry sergeant, thick-set, dusty coat, hand raised. "Ma'am," he said, beard stiff in twilight. "Lieutenant Greer sent word." He must speak with Miss Foster. Nell nodded. I am Nell Foster. The sergeant looked at her beads and ochre paint, hesitated, then cleared his throat. The lieutenant's orders. You're requested at Fort Harmon to verify identity. We don't wish to cause unrest. The words landed heavy. Whispered murmurs drifted from camp. Nakoa put a hand on Nell's arm. His face closed in shadow. She inhaled, steadying self against her chest. Then she spoke. I will go. But not to leave this place. The sergeant blinked. If you choose to remain, we'll proceed when you can counsel. Nakoa exhaled slowly. He bowed head once. Nell nodded, voice firm. I will go. To protect what we have built. The sergeant nodded. Word passed through the camp like wind across grass. Nell would leave at dawn, for her identity, but only to confirm it, not run from this place. The ceremony tent emptied slowly. Nell and Nakoa lingered. He said softly, Our unity will not break. She touched both their arrow-bound shafts. Not with honesty. They stood there. 2 worlds paused, waiting to T-dawn. Nell mounted before the camp. Her aunt and settlers gathered, eyes bright, murmuring blessings. Comanche warriors lined paths, stern, proud. Children waved. Nakoa fell in behind. Together, they rode east across prairie, boot prints of 2 worlds pressing into dirt. The wind carried both sorrow and resolve. When the cavalry fort came into view, its wooden stockade under warning flags, Nell's heart hammered. She turned to Nakoa. Wait for me. He nodded, voice deep. I'll wait until home. She nodded. The gates opened. The 2 rode through, symbols of unity entering a place meant for test. Nell exhaled, a promise, a bridge, a charge. The wind carried both fear and hope behind her horse, and the ceremony's embers glowed bright in memory as she passed the threshold of neither world alone. The stark walls of Fort Harmon loomed in the morning light, flags snapping in the chill dawn. Nell and Nakoa rode through the gate, flanked by rigid sentries. Inside, the courtyard's wooden benches and cobbled paths felt alien after cedar groves and open plains. Nell took a steadying breath as they dismounted before Lieutenant Greer, a man whose stare had become legend in these parts. Miss Foster, Greer began curtly, eyeing Nell's Comanche attire. Your arrival was unexpected. Nakoa remained by her side, silent sentinel. Nell met Greer's gaze calmly. I asked for time to confirm who I am. I intend to leave again on a trail you do not yet understand. Greer inclined his head once. Behind him, a clerk sat at a rough table, parchment and quill ready. Then we'll proceed, Greer said. Your story has stirred interest beyond official lines. The clerk stood and motioned Nell to sign her name. She raised her hand, dipped quill in ink, and wrote slowly, deliberately, Eleanor Margaret Foster. The pen scratched echoing significance across parchment. She added her Comanche name, Pa, in careful script alongside. The clerk paused, then noted both names. Greer looked toward the clerk. Ensure they are entered as dual identity. The clerk flinched but complied. Nakoa exhaled quietly and gently pressed Nell's hand. She nodded. Next came the council room, a wooden chamber lined with framed maps, rifles, and grim battle relics. Greer summoned Nell to stand before him and 2 visiting officers. Miss Foster, Greer began, do you confirm that Eleanor Margaret Foster and Pa, daughter of the Comanche, are the same person? Nell squared her shoulders. I confirm both. I am both. A silence followed as Greer leaned forward. Comanche attire here is irregular. But you have been accepted by them. Nell met his gaze fiercely. They accepted me as daughter, healer, warrior. I stand with them in oath. The officers exchanged glances. Greer nodded. Very well. We will record your status here. You will be free to travel where your presence is required. He paused, voice softening. Fort family will contact you. But your allegiance is yours. He tapped parchment. Recorded. Outside, Nell and Nakoa breathed together under open sky. She exhaled, relief, fear, promise all mingling. Nakoa stepped forward and wrapped both arms around her. She closed her eyes, feeling his strength wash through her. Behind them, Greer and the clerk observed from a distance. Greer spoke quietly, "She's more than I'd credit. Perhaps more than we thought." The clerk added softly, "She bridged worlds." They rode out of Fort Harmon with new papers, their proof they could pass between worlds at will. Nell tucked the documents into her pouch, picturing each signature as a bridge plank. The ride home was quiet, wind at their ears, grasses whispering around them. Nell thought of the camp waiting beyond the ridge. Cedar groves, communal fires, children's laughter. She inhaled deep, feeling the page turn to the grove's edge. Nakoa stopped her horse. They looked across the clearing, empty, expectant. Nell slipped from her saddle and walked forward. Nakoa followed. Comanche children ran to her, tugging at her skirt. Warriors emerged from tents, silent and proud. Elders rose slowly, faces unreadable until soft-stepping chiefs approached. First elder spoke, in Comanche, "You have proven your heart. Both worlds have spoken of your name. We welcome you back." Nell swallowed tears. She stepped forward and addressed them in English. "I returned. Not because I must, but because I am." Cheering followed, soft as blessing. Nell allowed herself to smile wide. Nakoa came beside her, raising her hand in the air. The warriors echoed, the children jumped, and even the elders moved to clap, stamps of unity marking the ground. Later, at the central fire, Nell told her story. The signing of documents, Greer's words, the acceptance in both logs. She spoke in both English and Comanche. She wove details, the pride in her aunt, the respect from soldiers, the gifts bestowed by elders. Each sentence resonated like drumbeats across the grove. When she finished, Nakoa rose. He turned to the community and said, "She is ours." They erupted into song and dance. Nell joined, laughter finally true. She reached for Nakoa, drawing him into circle, in night's end. The camp quieted, but Nell and Nakoa stood by the river that ran past the grove. The moon was a sliver overhead. She said quietly, "I'm both now." He kissed her forehead. "And one whole." They stood there, two figures cast in moonlight, holding a unity that would shape generations. But across the prairie, cavalry horses stirred. Dawn would bring settlers to meet their sister. Elders would choose, continue to trust, or hold Nell's duality at arm's length. Yet Nell believed, and Nakoa believed, that she would hold both worlds in her hands, the same way she held the oath stone and the pen. Night ended, but unity didn't.